Welcome to this review slash retrospective for the game Unreal Gold, which includes both the original Unreal as well as the expansion pack Return to Napoli. And what I want to do is just kind of briefly go over my thoughts on the game. I want to talk about basically the graphics and the sound, how I feel they, stack up with today's games and whatnot, because this is a pretty old game. And then I also want to talk about some of the community patches that are available and that I've tried out, and just how easy it is to play this game in the modern day. So without further ado, let me go ahead and jump into everything. We'll let things run in the background. I may even pull up a game here in just a second, but we'll go ahead and start with the graphics of the game. So I did install the HD textures, and I have to say that even though this game is well over 20 years old at this point, I think that the game still looks very good for the most part. Now, obviously, the HD textures do improve things substantially, um, but I would like to say that from my personal perspective, I feel that the engine, and this engine's been refined and improved many times over the years, but this engine in particular, in my opinion, works better when they're doing the big, bright outdoor spaces. Because those big, bright outdoor spaces, it just looks so much more impressive than, when you're stuck in the inner corridors and whatnot. And especially in the original game, I felt that was a problem that it had, in the fact that basically there are a lot of places that were just way too dark, and I couldn't see what was going on basically. And especially towards the end of the game, they got to be really bad, with all the darkness. Because I mean, you can tell just from me being in this area right now that it is a fairly well, this area is not as bad as some of the other ones, but definitely the darkness was something that was quite noticeable. Um, when I was originally playing it, I mean, it's kind of noticeable right now, to be honest with you. um, and Return to Napoli was probably a little bit better in those regards, because it did have a lot more um open spaces, relatively speaking, though it did have a couple of areas where you were underwater and the water was very cloudy, almost like algae infested to a certain extent. And that is actually probably the hardest thing about this game, was just getting past the noticed that before, getting past the hard to see visuals. Now, I believe that's probably by design, because they definitely gave you a lot of things like flashlights and flares and searchlights and things of that nature to help you see better in these dark areas. But at the end of the day, it wasn't exactly the funnest experience, especially like I said, for the original Unreal. That first, the end game is like you're in a completely and totally blackened out spot. You can't see anything. So that was not my favorite aspect of the game, to say the least. Um, and honestly, that was the hardest thing about the game, was that aspect. Music wise, though, man, I got to say, I played this game probably close to when it came out originally back in the day, and I don't remember the music being as uh, basically awesome. And I will say that that was one of the things about a lot of these. Why are you still standing there? Shouldn't you be running off or something? Yeah, just run off. So the the music for a lot of the first person shooter games back in the day, that was probably one of the defining aspects of a lot of them. And I guess I just never equated the uh, Unreal with basically having just an amazing soundtrack, but it most certainly does have a very amazing soundtrack. And just coming back to playing it, I would definitely say that a lot of the music that was in this game is pretty dang awesome, and I really enjoyed hearing it again. Um, Kind of pleasantly surprised at how good a lot of it was. Now, some of it kind of had a new age techno kind of sound to it, to say the least. And I wouldn't say those were my favorite songs, but they're pretty decent as well. Um, but overall, I mean, you can't complain with how good and solid the soundtrack to this game was. Uh, Definitely something that, the game of this type, a uh, a good soundtrack is one of those things that will stand the test of time, no matter what. Let me out of here. So definitely from a sound perspective, this game gets a huge thumbs up for me because it's actually really good from that perspective. Um, Gameplay wise, now I did play on hard difficulty mode, and and once again, like I was talking about with the graphics, you see how much better the game looks when you step outside and you got the bright lights and everything, and how much better it looks. It's just kind of a night and day difference to some of the later levels of the game, really. But anyway, um, the uh, the difficulty of the game is one of those things that, you know I did play it on hard, so that is something to keep in mind, definitely. But at the end of the day, the difficulty was, I don't know, kind of uneven a little bit, because you could go through some levels where you're just really struggling, or I was struggling to get through, and then the next level or two, you'd be like, wow, this is insanely easy, and I'd blow right through it like there was nothing there. And it was like that pretty much all throughout the game, really, because I mean, you would get to a point, you go through this really tough level, and then you'd end up hitting pretty much a very easy level that was, very quick to get through, and then you'd hit another level. It's like, okay, the last one was easy, let's just jump into this one, see how it goes. And 2 hours later, you're finally done with the level. So it definitely doesn't ramp up and stay consistent difficulty wise. I would definitely say that's an obvious aspect. Now, even on hard difficulty, I was able to kind of get through pretty much everything without having to resort to, really any cheat codes, up until I played the expansion pack. So Return to Napoli had just one level where basically when you get to the UMS Prometheus and you get there, and then they just basically swarm you with these Marines that have basically the same kind of weaponry that you do, where all they got to do is point in your general direction, they're hitting you, and your health is just dropping very quickly. Um, Not exactly a fun fight, and I did okay in it, to be honest. Um, it wasn't like I did really horribly or anything, but it was definitely frustrating. Not like these two guys. These two guys are going to get killed pretty easily. Probably famous last words, right? But anyway, um, the the difficulty there for Return to Napoli is probably the only point in the game where I had to turn on God mode. I mean, even doing some minor cheats where I gave myself uh, an extra shield belt and some other things of that nature still just wasn't good enough, because what they could do is they could hit you with that missile that could track you where you're going, and the other thing is they would attack you from multiple angles. That was probably the part of it that was actually the hardest, was because that you were getting hit from multiple sides, and all they had to do really is hit you with that missile once, and that's pretty much it. That's all she wrote for you. So that was definitely the hardest point of the game, to say the least, um, for me. And and that was things I was actually expecting something very similar towards the end of Return to Napoli. And I'm not going to say the ending of that expansion pack was easy, but compared to that one mid level, it was actually relatively not that bad, even though they did have the horrible mercenary troops there that were basically, messing me up. Um, but all in all, I'd say the a lot of the enemies were very imaginative, very fairly. I'm not going to say they were a huge variety of enemies. Um, I mean, I give it a decent, you know, smattering of enemies, if you will. But after a while, a lot of them did get to be very samey and repetitive. Um, Probably more so than some compared to some other, first person shooters I've tried out in the past. They were pretty decent. Like, initially, like the whole when you first face a Scar and they're sitting there rolling around and whatnot. And back in the day, that was very groundbreaking. The type of AI that was being used against you. But after a while, you're just like, okay, can we get on with all this kind of stuff, basically? And that's, I don't know, it not a huge variety of enemy types, and they were kind of like a lot of some of the other aspects of this game. A lot of times, because of their skin colors and whatnot, they would blend into the background a lot. So it would be very difficult to see them from a distance and make it really hard for you to hit them. So there's that aspect of the game as well. Um, but overall, it was a good, challenging experience. Um, I don't think it be what consider what I would say like one of the greatest FPSs of all time, but it's definitely up there. Um, and if you think about it, this engine was basically what put Unreal on the map. The Unreal Engine, I should say. Was what's the name of the company? GT Interactive. I forgot the name of the company. My bad. But they basically they benefited greatly from Unreal. Um, it really kind of cemented them with their you know rise, as it were. Oh well, screw you too then. But I guess that's one thing I can talk about is the weapon selection. So the weapon selection is, I don't know, it's pretty decent. I do like most of the weapons that are in the game, really. Um, about the only one, I mean, it does take a while to get going, I guess, on some of the weapon selection. Um, um, Trying to think, the Stinger's a good weapon. This auto mag was pretty decent as well. Um, a very unique type of weaponry, to say the least. And I definitely think it definitely kind of stands out from the crowd as far as that's concerned. Um, the weaponry in Return to Na Pali kind of hit or miss a little bit in some areas. Um, I like the assault rifle because it really did a good job of, you know, whittling away the enemy's health from a distance, and that was really neat. Um, Grenade launcher, I could take it or leave it. It was really not the greatest weapon out of all of them. In fact, it was probably my least favorite. Yeah, most of the weapons. Yeah, I think it was probably my least favorite overall. The rocket launcher itself was actually not all that bad. It was actually pretty decent. Um, I just didn't really use it that much because once you got the 8 ball launcher again, it was like the 8 ball launcher is just so much better than the rocket launcher because it could actually home in on things, which is something the rocket launcher. Well, I mean, I guess kind of could, but I just never figured out how to do it effectively compared to say how some of the enemies would, use that alternate fire very effectively against me, but you know, not necessarily worked that way for me as well as it did for them. I do like the storyline to a certain aspect of the game. It's a very decent storyline. I forgot about you. Um, though it does seem to drag a little bit, for lack of a better word. It does kind of go on for a while, and I mean, I'm glad that they resolved the cliffhanger with the whole return to Napoli thing. Oh, you son of a gun! But you know, decent storyline. Not the greatest of all, but it gets the job done, I suppose. So overall, I think the game itself is actually pretty decent. It does I feel, in my opinion, it does stand the test of time for the most part. I mean, you could probably complain about the models a little bit, and I think there might be some alternate meshes or something that you can download to make the models look a little bit better. But at the end of the day, I think for the most part, I mean, you're dealing with alien races mostly, so that's fine. They look fine to me. I wasn't really distracted too much by them, even though I do know there are better looking character models and whatnot out there. But for the most part, it worked for me, really. Um, I don't know. I think if I was to give this game a score, even playing it on hard difficulty mode like I was doing, I'd say it's probably a good solid 90, maybe 85, because at the end of the day, the extreme darkness is one of those things that could at many times of the game detract pretty heavily, and and I can already tell just from playing this medium difficulty, there's a big spike jump in difficulty from medium to hard. So not a gradual jump. It goes up quite substantially. So anyway, as far as playing the game on modern systems, it actually does play very well if you're using the community fan patches. Now, I played with two different types of fan patches, and and I don't know how I missed the um, the latest version when I first started playing it, but it did give me a good chance to try out a couple of different um, patches and different renderers that I wouldn't have been able to try out otherwise. So initially, I ran the 227i patch, and that worked well if you wanted to play with the DirectX 11 renderer, and that worked on Windows. I don't know if with Wine you could get that working under Linux well, but personally for me, I felt that the DirectX 11 renderer with the older patch was a little choppier, especially when you would start out a level. It would load and it would stutter a little bit before it would get going, and it was definitely noticeable. And I mean, this isn't a game that's going to stress your hardware. Even with HD textures, it's not really going to stress most of anybody's hardware if your computer's only my computer's over 10 years old, really, and it handled it pretty well. But that DirectX 11 renderer and the older patch, I could definitely tell there was some performance issues there. Now, when I upgraded to 227J and I used one of two different OpenGL renderers, it worked perfectly. I mean, it worked great, and I did have one issue that I feel was that issue is with the unofficial patch and the return to Napoli opening scene, and that only affected me when I was using the newer OpenGL. They call it X OpenGL, but after I got through that initial opening portion to the return to Napoli, I was able to go back to X OpenGL and use it without any issues. So it was just the opening to that level. Other than that, I feel like the newer 227J patch, I felt like it worked really well, and I felt that the game itself, I could feel better performance out of it, comparatively speaking, um, compared to using the uh, DirectX 11 renderer. So it was definitely good from that perspective, to say the least. Who do you think you are? Nobody. um, I definitely would say that the 227J patch itself is actually fairly easy to get up and running. Uh, not only under Windows, but it's actually pretty easy to get going even under Linux. And I did have a video that I made showing how to set that up, not only with the 227J patch, but also with the HD textures. And I would say that getting this game working with the HD textures and the most recent patch is actually pretty simple to do, uh, especially once you figure things out. And I would say that the um, the newer version of the patch definitely fixes a lot of problems that I think people running a modern system will appreciate better if you're using the 227J patch. The only reason I don't think I would really recommend trying out the DirectX 11 renderer, because I just feel that the fixes in the newer patch are so much better and the performance is better, that you're better off just using it and using the OpenGL renderer. That's my personal feelings, and I think you'll have a much better time playing the game if you do that. Now, um, if you notice the way I'm playing right now, I'm playing with the with a controller. So using the built-in functions of the game to use a controller doesn't work very well. In fact, it works very poorly, actually. Um, getting this working under Linux, under pretty much anything, it it's fairly easy to do. It really is, and it works great with the latest patch, in my opinion, and definitely something to give a try. Now, one thing I will say from a Linux perspective, I mentioned that I couldn't get my recording software and this game to do sound at the same time. So while I'm doing this whole video, I actually did not have to unplug my sound or mute the game audio because it's just not playing the audio. And I thought about that, and it's possible because I'm currently running Linux Mint, and Linux Mint is using the old Pulse Audio uh, system and not the new Pipewire one. So if you're running a different Linux distribution that is using Pipewire, like say Pop! OS or a newer version of Ubuntu, then it's possible that you would be able to get this game working with sound and recording software at the same time. But if you're just trying to play the game, it doesn't matter what version you use. The sound works just fine under Linux Mint. It's just something about the way Pulse Audio is implemented and the way Unreal is implemented. The two of them can't seem to work at the same time. Um, I tried messing with it a little bit, but at the end of the day, it just ended up not being worth, in my opinion, trying to figure out why the sound and the recording wasn't working at the same time. It would have been nice to have them both working at the same time, but you know, at the end of the day, I was able to revert to using Windows to get everything going. So that works out, I guess. Other than that, oh, that's what I was talking about before I got distracted. I was saying that I was playing this with a controller, and you know, kind of like when I was playing the Divinity 2 back in the day, I had mentioned how I used a program by the name of Anti-Micro-X, and I use it again here for Unreal, and it works great. I mean, it's perfect. You know, it definitely much better using Anti-Micro-X to try and use a controller for the game rather than try and use the built-in system. And I think I tried looking up a long time ago how to do it, and someone had a fairly complicated method of getting controllers working with Unreal. But at the end of the day, Anti-Micro-X is really all you need to get this going. And you know, scars everywhere will hate you for it. So anyway, yeah, that's my thoughts on the game. I think realistically it's an 85, maybe a 90 or so. Um, Getting it working on modern systems is actually not that difficult at all. It actually sets up and runs fairly easily if you're doing the latest community patch, which, to be fair, did come out at the beginning of 2022. So it's a fairly recent patch. Um, from some of the comments I read, the original, or not the original, but the last patch 227i was something that came out many years ago, and so it took several years for them to get that 227j patch up and running. But I mean, you could definitely tell that they did a good job with it, and it works really well. So anyway, yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts here on Unreal. I think it's definitely a game that if you consider yourself a fan of first person shooters, or you just want to see where the whole Unreal Engine got its start, then definitely give it a try because I think you'll have a good time playing it for sure. Um, it can be a little more difficult on the harder difficulty levels for sure, um, as I am experiencing here with me just not really putting forth a lot of effort and doing a lot better than when I played it initially. But anyway, yeah, that's my thoughts. It's a good game to play. Still fun even to this day, being more than 20 years old at this point. But it's definitely a game that I feel the community has done a good job of maintaining and improving and just keeping it relevant. And that's what they've done. The game is definitely still relevant and fun to play. And if nothing else, man, the soundtrack alone is worth playing this game for, because the soundtrack it's way better than I remember. And I usually remember the soundtracks to a lot of games I play, but this one really surprised me with how awesome the sound was in it. Anyway, that's my thoughts. I rambled quite a bit and got a little distracted here and there, but I definitely thank you for watching this video. I'll see y'all in the next one. Take care.